They were born forgotten, hidden deep in the folds of Appalachia, where poverty is inherited and survival is sacred. Then one day, the world came knocking, offering money, gifts, promises of rescue. But what followed wasn't salvation. It was slow erasure. Welfare gone, food gone, healthcare vanished. In trying to help, strangers unknowingly lit the fuse. And when it burned out, all that remained was silence. This is not a story of charity. It's a story of its consequences. They never asked to be seen. For decades, the Whitakers lived in near total obscurity, a cluster of weathered homes tucked into the hills of West Virginia, where the world rarely looked and never lingered. Poverty was not a spectacle there. It was routine, a reality etched into every rotting floorboard, every faded photograph, every tired face. Then came the cameras. A YouTube documentary cracked open their lives like a fault line. Millions watched. Millions commented. Strangers wept. Strangers judged. But most of all, they gave. Money, boxes of food, furniture, promises, a digital flood of compassion that no one, not the Whitakers, not their neighbors, not even the content creators, fully understood. The narrative was irresistible. America's most inbred family, a tragic living artifact of neglect and isolation. Timmy's grunts became viral. Betty's haunted stare became a meme. Lorraine's silence became a canvas onto which the internet projected everything it feared, pitied, and misunderstood. What the world saw was hardship. What the family lived was structure. Fragile, imperfect, but functional. They weren't helpless. They were surviving. Each month, supplemental security income checks trickled in. Small lifelines tethered to conditions barely understood by those outside the system. Medicaid kept the most urgent medical threats at bay. Food stamps stretched thin but steady. They made it work. They always had. But fame is not benign, and charity, when mixed with ignorance, becomes dangerous. Suddenly, they were a household name, a curiosity, a cause. Donations poured in. Creators kept returning with cameras and cash, hoping to witness transformation. No one noticed the undercurrent, the tightening tension in every room. A house gifted without consultation, a vehicle too costly to maintain. Money placed in the wrong name at the wrong time. It wasn't kindness they feared, it was collapse. What the world called generosity, the Whitakers came to understand as intrusion. Their lives were no longer their own. The balance that had once sustained them was now trembling under the weight of too much attention. In trying to elevate the family, the world failed to see what held them together. They had become the most watched family in America. But no one was truly looking. There is a myth that poverty is simple, that it can be cured with a check, a roof, a car. But for the Whitakers and families like them, poverty is not a moment. It is a system. And within that system, survival is an art form, governed by rules most outsiders never see. Supplemental security income was the backbone. Timmy, Lorraine, Betty, and Ray. None had a work history that could sustain them. Their benefits weren't gifts from the government. They were earned through years of hardship, disability, and lives lived on the margins. Each monthly check, sometimes less than what a suburban family spends at the grocery store in a week, was calibrated to the cent. Go above the asset threshold even accidentally, and the lifeline is severed. Medicaid was their hospital, their pharmacy, their emergency room. A doctor's visit meant access to insulin, antibiotics, sometimes even a bed in intensive care. Take away that coverage, and a cold could become pneumonia, an infection, a death sentence. Food stamps filled the gaps, barely. Enough to avoid hunger, but never enough to feel full. Still, they endured. They knew when to buy, when to stretch, how to share. This wasn't failure. It was function. The system they depended on was designed to keep them alive, but not to let them escape. It is a system where stability is rewarded and sudden change is punished. A paradox dressed as policy. If the Whitakers were given $5,000 in cash, their SSI could be cut off immediately. Health insurance revoked, food support suspended. Not because they were no longer in need, but because they had too much on paper. Too much to qualify, too little to survive. And the system does not forgive mistakes. A deposit made to the wrong account, a car gifted without title management, a well-intentioned camera crew handing over a wad of bills. All of it counted, all of it penalized. No one explained the consequences. Not the creators, not the viewers, not the donors. The system didn't speak in hashtags or GoFundMe blurbs. It spoke in case files and automated letters, cold, bureaucratic notices of termination. The Whitakers weren't blind to their reality. They had learned its rules, its limits. And within those limits, they had carved out a kind of stability. But the moment charity arrived without knowledge, the system began to buckle. Because the truth is, poverty is a structure. And when you shake it without understanding, the whole thing can come crashing down. They didn't knock, they just arrived. Tripods, lights, questions. Some came with cameras, others with promises. Most came with both. The hills of Odd, West Virginia, had rarely seen visitors, let alone filmmakers and vloggers with millions of followers. But now, the Whitakers were content. At first, it seemed like salvation. View counts soared. Comments poured in, drenched in sympathy and awe. And then came the gifts. A used car, delivered with fanfare, new furniture still wrapped in plastic, boxes of food dropped off like offerings. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, of dollars sent through PayPal, Venmo, and wire transfers. It was overwhelming, and it was dangerous. Timmy grunted approval. Betty smiled awkwardly at the camera. Lorraine stayed quiet. They didn't understand the scope of what was happening, not because they couldn't, but because no one explained. The cameras were there to capture emotion, not consequences. What looked like generosity on screen was disruption behind the scenes. No one asked how much money they could legally receive. No one asked how gifts should be structured to protect their benefits. And no one asked what the family actually wanted. It was never about them. It was about the moment, the shot, the story. Content creators were chasing transformation. They wanted before and after. Poverty turned prosperity. It made for good thumbnails. But the Whitakers were not a project. They were a family. And each gift, each check, was like a crack in the dam. When Mark, a relative, tried to shield them by keeping the donations in a separate account, he wasn't being secretive. He was trying to prevent the collapse. He knew that placing the money in their names would trigger audits, reductions, disqualifications. He knew what the viewers didn't. That every dollar given carelessly could take away 100 more in support. But the pressure was constant. More cameras, more questions, more outsiders wanting to help, to give, to feel good about it. And all the while, the system watched silently. The irony was brutal. The same people who wanted to change their lives were unknowingly unraveling them. Each gesture of kindness had to be weighed against the risk of losing everything. A car wasn't freedom. It was potential disqualification. A home wasn't security. It was a target. What the creators captured was compassion. What they missed was the cost. Because when the cameras came, so did the consequences. The letters came in white envelopes, unmarked, unannounced. But inside, the message was always the same. Your benefits have been adjusted. A phrase so sterile it almost masked its brutality. The Whitakers began to lose more than they gained. First, it was Betty's food assistance, reduced because her income had exceeded the allowable limit. The state counted the gifted stove as a financial asset. Then Timmy's Medicaid coverage was flagged for review. The cash donations he never asked for had pushed his declared resources beyond the threshold. A single camera crew's kindness meant he now needed to prove, again, that he was poor enough to be worthy of care. Lorraine was next. Her SSI payment dropped with no explanation she could understand. The system didn't account for nuance, only numbers. Money in, money out. If her name was attached to a donation even for a brief moment, it was enough. These weren't just bureaucratic headaches. These were survival fractures. Without food stamps, groceries became a game of subtraction. Without Medicaid, medications were skipped. Without SSI, bills stacked like bricks on the front porch. The fragile ecosystem they had built, one where disability, government support, and lived knowledge held them together, was splintering under the weight of unexpected abundance. The most painful part? It wasn't theft. It wasn't exploitation. It was love. Misguided, unstructured, reckless love. People wanted to help. They believed they were doing good. But they gave like outsiders, thinking like saviors, acting like wealth could heal what only stability could protect. And in that misalignment, the family suffered. Mark tried to manage it. He played accountant, lawyer, counselor, all without training, without support. He begged donors to send money directly to him, off the books, out of sight. Not to hoard it, but to protect it. Because once a name like Timmy's appeared on a transaction, it was too late. The government did not care about intentions, only totals. A family that had lived for decades with predictability, however limited, now faced chaos. Not from poverty, but from generosity. The Whitakers began to withdraw. Doors that once cracked open to visitors now remained shut. Trust turned brittle. Gratitude turned to fear. And yet the cameras kept coming, smiling, filming, giving. All while the system quietly took everything back. To the outside world, the Whitakers looked broken. Poor, isolated, uncivilized. Their silence was mistaken for ignorance. Their routines mistaken for stagnation. But those who live in the margins don't survive by accident. They survive by mastery. There was an order to their days, a rhythm built over decades. When the check came, when the food stamps reloaded, which local stores stretched coupons further, how to make heat last through a bitter Appalachian winter. Who knew how to navigate paperwork? Who remembered which prescription needed renewal before the 30-day cutoff? Survival was not luck. It was precision. Lorraine knew when to speak and when silence could protect her. Timmy, for all his limitations, understood the layout of their land better than any GPS could. Betty had memorized the intake workers' names at the local clinic. They weren't helpless. They were fluent in the language of endurance. But no one asked them how they survived. No one studied the blueprint they had built. The content creators assumed their job was to fix, to clean, to build something better. But better is a word forged by perspective, and the Whitakers' perspective was shaped by survival, not aesthetics. A house might need repairs, yes. But did it have insulation? Would an air conditioner spike the electric bill and cause disqualification from utilities assistance? A used car might seem like freedom. But who would pay the insurance? Who would fix the brakes when they failed? These were not hypothetical questions. They were daily decisions. Every act of charity introduced a new variable into an already fragile equation. No one asked the right questions. Do you want this? Will this help you in the long term? How will this impact your benefits? Instead, gifts were dropped off like blessings, filmed and forgotten. The family was treated like a project, a chance to prove that kindness could heal all wounds. But they didn't need healing. They needed protection, empowerment, understanding. Poverty, in its cruel way, had taught them how to survive within systems designed to keep them from thriving. They had mastered invisibility, mastered endurance. They were not the problem. They were the result. And every time someone tried to overwrite their story with a fairy tale ending, They erased what had taken a lifetime to build, a delicate art of living, misunderstood and misrepresented. Because survival isn't always something you escape. Sometimes it's something you've learned to perfect. They say resilience is a virtue, that to endure is to triumph. But what happens when resilience becomes the only thing left? As the gifts piled up and the cameras returned, the Whitakers didn't collapse. They adapted. They always had. That was their nature. But adaptation is not victory. It is survival with teeth clenched and breath held. Mark became the reluctant guardian of the family's stability. He wasn't trained. He wasn't appointed. He simply saw the cracks forming and did what he could to seal them. Donations were funneled through accounts not tied to SSI. Medical appointments were rescheduled to align with benefit reviews. Phone calls to caseworkers blurred into pleading monologues. He wasn't managing money. He was managing risk. The rest of the family braced. Betty grew more anxious. Timmy's routines, so crucial to his sense of calm, were disrupted by the revolving door of outsiders. Lorraine receded even further, sensing what the others couldn't articulate. The attention didn't feel like salvation anymore. It felt like surveillance. And still, the content kept coming. More videos, more interviews, more updates on the family's progress. But what the audience didn't see were the whispered conversations after the cameras left. The panic when a letter arrived from social services. The questions no one could answer. Did this gift count as income? Would they lose the trailer? Was the Medicaid form filled out correctly this time? They were now fighting a war on two fronts. Poverty on one side, generosity on the other. One they understood. The other they didn't. Resilience had become a performance, a constant act of appearing grateful while secretly calculating the damage. Smiling for cameras, knowing the next video could cost them their food assistance. Accepting help while praying it wouldn't be the kind that disqualifies them from seeing a doctor. There was no villain, only a brutal misunderstanding. No one who helped meant harm. But help without context can be as dangerous as neglect. And now, the Whitakers stood in the middle of it, tired, exposed, and cornered. They had lived through decades of poverty and made it out intact. But this was different. This was instability dressed as kindness. This was a slow unraveling of a life they had worked so hard to hold together. Their resilience was still intact, but it had nothing left to hold on to. We want to believe that giving is always good, that money offered in kindness can fix what's broken. But the story of the Whitakers tells us something harder, something most people don't want to hear. Help without understanding is just another form of control. When the cameras stopped rolling and the packages stopped arriving, the family was left to clean up the wreckage. Their benefits, once predictable, now teetered on the edge of cancellation. Their routines, once carefully balanced, had been shattered by intrusion. And their story, once private, belonged to everyone but them. What they needed was never spectacle. It was structure. It was protection. It was empowerment on their terms. True help does not look like a viral video. It looks like asking, "What do you need?" It sounds like listening. It acts with patience, not urgency. It honors the systems people have built to survive, even when those systems seem strange to outsiders. Because poverty is not just a lack of money. It is a presence, a force, and those who live within it know how to navigate its rules far better than those who drop in with good intentions and a camera crew. The Whitakers didn't need to be saved. They needed to be understood. Their story is not just about the danger of poverty. It's about the danger of ignoring the wisdom born from it. About how even the purest forms of generosity can unravel lives if they fail to account for the structures already in place. This is the paradox of charity. And in the end, the deepest form of compassion isn't giving what you think someone needs. It's taking the time to ask what will truly help. and having the humility to listen.